Stop chasing closure and begin by noticing the breath, soft and present, flowing in and out like the tide, asking nothing of you, but to simply allow, because closure is not a thing to be found, not a door to be locked, or a ribbon to be tied. It is not a conversation finally had, or a clear answer finally given. Closure, in the way we often seek it, is just another grasping, another reaching for control over something already past, already changed. And Zen invites us not to finish the story, but to let go of needing to finish it, to see that the clinging to endings is itself the root of the suffering. And the path of peace is not paved with finality, but with presence, with the courage to sit with what is unresolved, unlabeled, unnamed, and still somehow complete in its incompleteness. Moving on gracefully doesn't come from understanding why something happened, but from accepting that it did, and allowing the story to soften around its jagged edges without needing to be rewritten. The mind wants to know, wants to make sense, wants someone to say sorry, to explain, to justify, to clarify. But Zen teaches that the need to know is itself a form of bondage, because peace is not in answers, but in attention, in the simple act of returning again and again to this breath, this moment, this body, and releasing the need to turn pain into meaning or meaning into closure. Because sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is stop trying to fix what broke and instead bow to it, bow to the story that ended, to the relationship that fell away, to the version of ourselves that no longer fits. And in that bow, we do not erase what was. We honor it without needing it to be anything other than what it was. To move on is not to move away, but to move inward, to sink deeper into what remains when the grasping stops, when the story dissolves, and we meet the ache directly without the armor of explanation. This is the quiet teaching of impermanence, not just that everything ends, but that nothing ends in the way we want it to. And still, there is beauty in the way things unravel, in the mystery of the not knowing, in the breath that continues even as the heart breaks. And when we stop demanding closure, we begin to find openness, spaciousness in the silence, in the unanswered text, in the unfinished sentence, in the lack of resolution. We find that healing does not come from perfect understanding, but from present moment honesty. This is how it feels right now, in my body, in my breath, in my being. And we breathe through it, not to make it disappear, but to make space for it, to let it live and move and pass through, like all things do, when they are not resisted. You do not need their apology to be at peace. You do not need your own clarity to rest. You need only to stay gently with yourself and let the waves rise and fall. In the end, what we're really chasing when we chase closure is permission. Permission to let go, to move forward, to no longer carry the weight of what we didn't get to finish. But Zen offers a different permission, not from someone else, but from within. The kind of inner permission that says, I choose now over what could have been. And that is how grace enters, not with answers, but with acceptance, not with declarations, but with silence, not with certainty, but with surrender. And so we come back to the breath again, letting the need to wrap it all up fall away, letting the ache be part of the path, letting the unanswered question become part of the beauty. Because not every wound needs to be named to be healed, and not every door needs to be closed to be walked away from. You are allowed to leave the story without finishing it, to walk away without bitterness, to move on without having the last word. This is the teaching. Freedom is found not in the end of pain, but in the end of clinging to what pain should mean, should teach, should resolve. And in that letting go, there is space for something new to arrive. Not a better story, but a clearer presence. Not a new answer, but a deeper silence. And this silence holds you as you are, whole even in your unknowing, beautiful even in your breakage, free even without closure. And so you remain, breathing into the open, undefined space where no closure arrives and none is needed, where you let the ache remain unframed by explanation and the loss sit quietly without story. And here you discover the gentle medicine of not knowing, of not forcing, of simply being with what remains. Zen does not teach that all must be solved. It teaches that all must be seen. And so we turn inward not to repair, but to receive, not to control, but to witness. And as we soften our grip on resolution, the heart begins to relax into its natural rhythm again, unburdened by the weight of why, free to simply beat, simply feel. And in this return to simplicity, we find clarity, not the clarity of knowing, but the clarity of being, uncluttered, raw, direct. It is the clarity of a sky no longer trying to hold on to clouds, of a river no longer holding its banks tight. And in that clarity, we begin to trust the silence, to let it carry us forward without roadmap or final word. Because what matters now is not what was said or left unsaid, but how we meet ourselves in the aftermath. Whether we continue to build shrines to endings or simply sit with the empty space they left behind. And in that sitting, we may begin to sense something new. Not a lesson, not a fixed, but a presence, a deep inner stillness that needs no explanation. And this stillness begins to hold us, like a great unshakable mountain, rooted and open and alive. You may feel moments where the pattern returns, where the mind seeks again, where the heart reaches again. And when that happens, you do not scold yourself or push it away. You meet it like an old friend, familiar and no longer threatening, and say, I see you, and I'm still choosing peace. And in that choice, over and over again, the pattern loses its grip, and something softer, quieter begins to grow. The truth is, moving on does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean never feeling the sting of what happened. It means choosing not to be owned by it, not to feed it with your longing or shape your identity around it. And this choice is not loud, not announced. It is made silently, in the small inner shift that says, I no longer need closure to be whole. And that whisper carries weight. It transforms the inner landscape. Because when we release the need for completion, we become complete. This is the paradox of Zen. Only in giving up our search do we find what is lasting. And only in letting go of finality do we find continuity. Not the continuity of story, but of presence, of now, of breath flowing into breath, moment into moment, life continuing with or without our understanding. And this is enough, more than enough, because you are not here to perfect the past. You are here to befriend the present, not to collect endings like trophies, but to arrive fully in what is still unfolding, unfinished, unresolved, and beautifully alive. And still the breath returns, quiet, effortless, asking nothing, giving everything. And as it moves through you, you begin to realize that closure, that final answer you've been waiting for, does not live in the mind that circles questions, but in the body that holds presence, in the chest that softens without knowing why, in the shoulders that release even without resolution, in the heart that continues to beat even as the story remains incomplete. And so we stop trying to edit the past or finish a scene that has already ended. And instead we bow gently to the fragments, to the silence left behind, to the door that closed without explanation. And we begin to trust that it is enough to live in the space between knowing and not knowing, between what was and what might be I. Because all Zen asks of us is this: to be awake here, now, with what is. And in that awakeness, even grief becomes sacred. Even uncertainty becomes a doorway. And so we stop chasing closure like a destination and begin to walk in the open field of not needing to understand everything. Because in that field we are free. Not because we've solved the mystery, but because we've surrendered our need to solve it. And every time the old questions arise, why did it end? What did it mean? What could I have done differently? We meet them with breath, with stillness, not to push them away, but to sit beside them, like sitting beside a stream, not needing to step in, not needing to change its course, just watching it flow. And over time, the questions soften, their urgency fades, and we see that peace was never on the other side of understanding. It was always right here, on the other side of allowing. And in this allowing, the past loses its weight, not because we've erased it, but because we've integrated it, not through answers, but through presence, through being the one who stays, who breathes, who bows, who continues. And so when the ache visits again, and it will, you let it in like a guest, not to give it everything, but to acknowledge its presence. And then you return again to now, again to breath, again to this unnameable moment where nothing is required, and yet everything is welcome. You begin to trust that moving on is not something you accomplish. It is something you allow. And that permission, that willingness to not know, to not conclude, to not force a lesson, is the beginning of grace. And grace is not clean, not linear, not polished like the endings we imagined. It is ragged and raw and real, and always enough. Because grace doesn't say, you should have known better. Grace says, you didn't, and that's okay. Grace says, you're still here, and that is enough. And Zen walks hand in hand with grace, saying, look closely, breathe deeply, soften again and again. And as you walk this path, there will be echoes, memories, emotions, thoughts that pull you back into the old shape, the old story. But now you see them. Now you recognize them not as truth, but as echoes, and you bow to them too. And you keep walking, not toward closure, but into openness, into the spaciousness of not needing to be done, not needing the seal, not needing to explain why the road curved the way it did. You are not here to finish old stories. You are here to live new ones. And the first chapter begins with letting go of needing the last chapter to make sense, because it may never make sense. And that's not a failure. That's a fact of life. And when we stop resisting life, we become part of it, no longer standing outside of the flow, demanding reasons, but immersed within it, trusting the current, letting go of the edge, and breathing, breathing, breathing. And as the breathing continues, soft, silent, unhurried, you begin to realize that the very act of seeking closure was never about the other person or the event, or even the ending itself. It was always about your own longing to be at peace, to feel settled, to stop the spinning mind from returning again and again to what slipped away. But now, in this stillness, in this wordless moment, you begin to understand that peace does not require closure. Peace only requires presence, and presence is always available, even amid sorrow, even amid uncertainty, even amid the lingering feeling that something should have gone differently. And this is the quiet liberation that Zen offers, not through force, not through understanding, but through resting in what is, exactly as it is, uncorrected, unclosed, unfinished. And when the mind stirs again, when the questions rise up like steam, was it my fault? Do they still think of me? Why did it end like that? You simply notice, without engaging, like clouds drifting across a wide blue sky, and you let them pass, returning again to the breath, to the subtle inner stillness beneath all stories, all seeking, all striving. And here, in this stillness, you begin to feel yourself softening, not breaking, not collapsing, but yielding like a flower opening in spring. And you realize, I do not need to know everything to be whole. I do not need to close every loop to move forward. I do not need to hear the words I longed for to free myself. Freedom begins, not in the other's voice, but in your own willingness to stop waiting, to stop searching, to stop measuring your healing by how complete the ending was. And this truth lands not in the mind, but in the body, in the breath, in the sense of spaciousness that comes when you stop holding on to what has already left, when you unclench your hands, when you stop rehearsing the conversations that never came, and instead bring gentle awareness to the one voice that always remains, your own. And in that awareness, you realize the truth. Closure is not a door that someone else must shut. It is a space within you that opens when you no longer demand anything from the past, not the explanation, not the apology, not even the justice you once thought was required for peace to take root. Because now you see, peace is not something earned, it is something allowed. And in allowing, you remember who you are, beneath the story, beneath the wound, beneath the ache. You are the sky, not the weather, the presence, not the thought, the one who notices, not the one who clings. And with each breath, you let go a little more, not by force, not by pushing, but by relaxing into this moment, which needs no improvement, no correction, no closure, just your presence, just your noticing, just your gentle, quiet yes to whatever is here right now. And slowly, without announcement or fanfare, the story you carried so tightly begins to dissolve, not because it's gone, but because it's no longer defining you, no longer the lens through which you view yourself or the world. And you find that you no longer need to carry it in the same way, no longer need to hold it up as evidence of your worth or your loss, because here, in this still and sacred space, you realize that you are not your story, you are not your ending, you are not your heartbreak, you are this awareness, this soft, vast, open awareness that holds everything, even this, even them, even the parts you thought you'd never get over. And in that holding, something shifts, something releases, something settles. And that is enough, more than enough. And so you allow this moment to stretch without limit, not to rush it toward resolution, not to shape it into something more satisfying, but to simply let it be what it is, formless, silent, uncontainable. And in that allowing, a deeper clarity arises, that moving on is not a decision made once, but a practice chosen again and again, in the face of every familiar emotion that visits you. It is the art of softening rather than reacting, of bowing rather than bracing, of welcoming what you do not prefer with the same reverence as what you do. And slowly, gently, the internal tension releases, not all at once, but like ice melting under the sun, drop by drop, layer by layer, until the heart begins to trust that it no longer needs to protect itself through certainty. And the world opens a little more each time you say yes to this now, to this breath, to this inner reality that may still ache, but no longer demands explanation, just compassion. And you begin to understand. The ache does not mean you are stuck. The sadness does not mean you failed to let go. They are simply weather patterns within you. And like all weather, they will pass if you do not try to trap them, if you do not turn them into a story about who you are. And as you continue to sit in this spacious presence, You no longer define your progress by how much you've forgotten, but by how willing you are to stay tender even with what hurts. How often you return to the breath when the old voices rise up. How deeply you allow yourself to be human in the absence of resolution. And this is where healing matures, not into triumph, but into tenderness, not into pride, but into humility. The kind of humility that says, I don't have all the answers, and I don't need them to feel peace. Because this is Zen, not an answer, but an invitation, not a path with milestones, but a vast field where you can rest as you are, where nothing is missing and nothing is extra, where you can feel what you feel without rushing it to become something else. And in that rest, your nervous system exhales, your shoulders drop, your mind grows quiet, not empty, just unentangled, and you begin to walk again, not away from the past, but forward into the openness that follows surrender, not knowing what will come, not needing to know. And this is what it means to stop chasing closure. Not that you never remember what hurt you, but that you no longer need it to end on your terms in order to be free. And as you walk onward, slow, deliberate, free of the burden to solve what cannot be solved, you begin to feel that spaciousness grow inside you, not as an escape, but as a quiet inner refuge where the past no longer tethers your identity, where the pain no longer defines your path, and the stories lose their edges, blur into softness, become merely weathered pages in a book you no longer need to reread. And in this wide inner space, where breath flows without effort and time loses its urgency, you understand, moving on gracefully is not about never looking back. It's about looking back without being pulled under, about holding memory like you would hold a feather, lightly, lovingly, without trying to rewrite it or carry its weight as your own anymore. And this is the essence of Zen, not the erasure of the past, but its integration, not forgetting what was, but meeting it so fully that it no longer needs to chase you, because you have turned to face it, bowed, breathed, and welcomed it into the vastness of what is here now. And as you continue to breathe, to return, to rest in what cannot be fixed or finished, you begin to feel something new arise. Not joy, not clarity, but peace. The kind of peace that grows only in the soil of acceptance, where nothing more is demanded of life, of others, or even of yourself. And from that peace, your steps become lighter, not because the path has changed, but because you are no longer dragging what cannot be carried. You are no longer waiting for someone else to return with the final word, no longer waiting for closure to declare you healed, because healing is not an arrival, it is a becoming of someone who is tender, open, still breathing, and more whole for having allowed it all. And so you end, not with punctuation, not with a conclusion, but with a breath, a bow, and a quiet thank you to the path, to the pain, to the practice, and to yourself, for staying, for softening, for letting go, without needing to be finished. If this message brought you calm, this space is always here for you. Subscribe, return, and walk this quiet path with us, one breath at a time. Until next time, remember, let go with grace, trusting the unfolding of my path.